Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of 𝑏𝒂?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
The President of the United States.
The U.S. President is Donald Trump.
Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. And we are here post-election. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm excellent. And I think what you just heard is not only did Donald Trump win the votes, he also won official recognition from Siri, which I think is a bigger deal than even getting Jake Tapper to acknowledge
or the
it.
Electoral College, right?
100%.
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting night. It was a late night. And there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to talk about what the election demonstrated, what it showed, and we're going to look forward to what we can expect. Things at the New York Times are a little bit tense right now.
Things are a little bit tense at the New York Times. It's funny because we're excited to talk about what happened. It's a big deal. Donald Trump has won, maybe the greatest political comeback in maybe, American history in some
Without
sense.
doubt, yeah.
What's the thing that surprised you the most from last night?
The thing that surprised me the most is how it was a nationwide trend.
Okay.
It wasn't just a state. It wasn't just here or there. It was across the country, which I think is remarkable. I mean, the fact is people were thinking, is he going to pick up Pennsylvania? Is he going to pick up North Carolina? Late last night, he was ahead in all of them. We'll see how the counting comes. That I think is the most surprising thing and the most stunning thing. I'm not sure that's what the New York Times came away with.
Well, the New York Times has pointed out a lot of different things. They had like 10 takeaways, but one of them, to your point, is how the entire country moved to the right. So Trump won Florida by 13 points. That's 10 more than he won 4 years ago. Texas moved to the right by 10 points. Ohio moved by 3 more than 4 years ago. New York, not a red state, moved 13 points. Virginia shifted 6 points. So you did see this kind of larger shift in many ways. So I think that was a surprise to see. Like, you had the sense that would be happening, but the extent to which it did, I think, is shocking.
Yeah.
My big surprise is how nervous and anxious you get during election watch parties. I mean, you're like, you're a best-selling author. I think in many respects, the work you've done and the work we've done at the Government Accountability Institute is partly responsible for some of the trends we're seeing in this country. Yet the fact remains that you are not unlike a high school girl waiting for a promposal. Like, what they say.
And it came.
And it's my job to tell you, no, I think they like you. They think it's going to happen. Just like wear your makeup tomorrow in fourth period. But it did happen. And so it was a big deal. And everyone's very excited about the things that we're seeing, or a lot of people that listen to this podcast, I know, are excited. But not everybody. Actually, I forgot to tell you this. Somebody came up to me who's regularly talked to me about this Drill Down podcast, and I saw them at a sporting event, and because I knew they listened to the podcast, I was like, I got happy to buy you a beer, and like, happy, thanks for listening. And he goes, after I bought him the beer, he was like, well, yeah, because I always like to know what the other side's up to. And then he proceeded to tell me how much he was not into Donald Trump. So there were real headwinds against now the 47th president, and more headwinds are coming. And this is what you're talking about, because what the New York Times has told us today in their write-up about this election is that Donald Trump poses a historically unique threat to American democracy, unlike anything we faced in our 200-plus year history.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an amazing, amazing statement, and I think it's probably worth reading at length. Donald Trump told the American people exactly what he planned to do. He would use military force against his political opponents. I don't remember that. He would fire thousands of career public servants. He would let me start.
Deport.
He would deport millions of immigrants in military-style roundups. And she goes on to write in this column, it's a media analysis. This is not a editorial, that America has basically elected this, in her words, dictator.
Yeah, they're using the quote that he said he would be a dictator on day one. And then they conclude it with, when asked to give him the power to do all of that, the voters said yes. And they say, this is an election, this is a totalitarian regime signed by a permission slip by American voters.
Yeah, I mean, remarkably naive and ignorant on so many levels, because it doesn't reflect at all what Trump's positions were. But it's also historically stupid to say that this is going to be the biggest threat 248 years. Let's remember, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, right?
Absolutely.
A constitutional right.
And FDR, as we've discussed previously, rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in internment camps.
In camps.
Now, but here's what's crazy is, like, if you're a reporter for the New York Times, or let's say a host on MSNBC, you legitimately believe he will do that to you. I mean, I think that's either.
I don't know if they do. You really think they believe it, or do you think it was just a
scare tactic?
Yes.
Well, I think the biggest conceit, if you are part of the liberal media establishment, is thinking that mainstream Americans who are like struggling to pay for groceries or gas or their utility bill will decide not on that, but like what's going to happen to Mika Brzezinski. Like, oh no, we can't let Mika go to the dang camp.
Right.
Like,
no, but
do it for Mika.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: whether they actually believe it or not, or it's a scare tactic. Here's the problem, and this is where we're going in discussing where the country is going to be going next. Is you can't back down. I mean, once you have said that Trump is Hitler, you can't, after an election like this, say, okay, well, we need national unity, so let's work with Hitler. Let's pass legislation with Hitler. No. What's going to happen, and what we're going to discuss today and what form it takes, is they are going to double down.
Yeah.
And there's several people that are telling us that.
The deep state double down, and they're already telegraphing that. I think it's a good phrase you've used. Just a couple of the things before we get into like what the new resistance will look like. I mean, we talked about the shift that happened and the entire country went right. Here's a stat for you. My biggest takeaway, other than your, it's cute, right? Like that you have during these election parties. Kamala Harris, as of now, has 66 million, almost 67 million votes. Joe Biden in 2020 received over 81 million votes. Donald Trump had 74 million in 2020. He has 71 million now. So if you're doing a little quick math, that's like 18 million votes that didn't show up last night that showed up 4 years ago.
That's almost 25%, by the way. That's almost 25 or 20% of Democrat. They have
it's
20%.
10%. It's a solid 10% from 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean it's remarkable when you think about that.
And so just think about put it in this context. To the extent that Donald Trump won last night, it's a repudiation and a rejection of what you just said. They were told for 4 years that Donald Trump is Hitler, he's Nazi, he's a fascist, he's this unique threat to democracy. Oh, by the way, people who said democracy is very threatened, 50% of them voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what last night really represents is the rejection of what we've been told consistently by the traditional elite media and the politicians. And that includes, by the way, the fact that 2020 was the most secure and safe election in history. I mean, think about that. 15 million votes just disappeared.
Right.
And we're like, it's cool. It's because it's almost like when you send everybody a ballot, and you allow people to go up and round them up, and you end up with 15 million. It just puts that election outcome into a different context.
It does, and it shows what an outlier 2020 was.
Absolutely.
For whatever reasons, whether it was the ballot harvesting, whether it was other issues or problems, it was an outlier, and it demonstrates that we are still kind of a country that is center-right, even though in 2020 it didn't seem like it.
But let's think about this, right? Because I think what we're talking about is what the deep state's prepared to do, what people are now telling us they want to do moving forward and looking forward. But I think when you start with like how committed was the resistance to Donald Trump, you have to include the way we allowed the country to conduct an election in 2020 to be one of the things they did to try to stop Donald Trump. 2 impeachments didn't work in his first term. We then said, okay, fine, we're going to flood the zone with election integrity and the most ballots ever cast by the least secure way possible. And then, okay, that worked. And then we said, all right, how happened? Here's 4 different criminal charges.
Right.
And, here's 2 assassination attempts.
Right.
And it's kind of like you and I were talking about, what do we do as this nonprofit organization if Kamala Harris won? I said, well, what we have to do is look at why did they fight so hard to beat Donald Trump?
Yeah.
And so I think what you're now going to see is like just because this election's over doesn't mean that same force that did all those other things are going to stop.
Right. They did. When Trump won in 2016, he faced a lot of internal resistance, and we're going to talk about that. You've got the issue of the deep bureaucracies, the deep state. You've got the mainstream media that's going to work in concert with the deep state. But several people have been talking about this, and I think it's important to point out that any people who thought we were going to have greater national unity, we had this contest, we had this election. Mark Cuban did this, right? Mark Cuban was backing Kamala Harris, and he says, Donald Trump won fair and square. Great job, bro. That's not where the Democratic Party is going to be in the deep state. They're actually laying out the fact that they now need to double down.
And the leader, I mean, you wouldn't call him really the leader of deep state, but I think it's a quote that's indicative of where the deep state and these traditional elites are. You think was embodied by Jon Stewart during his election coverage last night. Listen to what Jon Stewart said at the end of his broadcast.
But this isn't the end. I promise you, this is not the end. And we have to regroup, and we have to continue to fight and continue to work day in and day out to create the better society for our children, for this world, for this country, that we know is possible. It's possible.
So that's a Jon Stewart version, which is pretty mild compared to some of the other things that are being said. So this is from David Frum, a Never Trumper conservative writing in The Atlantic, which used to be this august publication. Listen to what he says. He's laying the predicate for justifying even the further radicalization of anti-Trump forces. He says radicalization of the anti-Trump camp is inevitable as people begin to understand that existential issues such as climate change and gun violence will not be tackled. So the point is, hey, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Or one of your favorite people, Liz Cheney, she also doubled down.
She did. And I think that's another great name to reference now. By the way, congratulations to Liz Cheney for surviving the firing squad that apparently was threatened against her with Donald Trump. I mean, that quote typifies where we were in the last week. You have a joke about Puerto Rican trash, and you have a joke, you have the comment that Donald Trump's making that anybody that listens to it says, look, she's a big war proponent. It'd be interesting to see if she was as enthusiastic about wars if she had to be
on the front lines.
That's clearly what he said, and they tried to use that to turn into clearly he's this unhinged anti-female violent person. But Liz Cheney now says, who acknowledging that Trump won, says, we now have a special responsibility as citizens of the greatest nation on earth to do everything we can to support and defend the Constitution, preserve the rule of law, and ensure our institutions hold over these coming 4 years. Citizens across this country, our courts, members of the press, and those serving in our federal, state, and local governments must now be the guardrails of democracy. Why is that notable to you?
Well, it's notable to me because what she's saying is that those serving in our federal, state, and local governments must become the guardrails of democracy. Their job is to execute and carry out the policies of the executive branch.
Yeah.
It's not to say, you know what, we don't like what the president of the United States is doing. We don't like this policy on, say, immigration. So screw it. We're going to be the guardrail of democracy and make our own choice. That's really what she's calling for here, is sort of chaos and resistance. Robert Reich, of course, the former labor secretary, Bill Clinton, also a big leader on the left, said, we will resist Donald Trump's tyranny. Although peaceful and nonviolent, the resistance will nonetheless be committed and determined. It will encompass every community in America. It will endure as long as necessary. We will never give up on America. The resistance starts now. I guess I thought the resistance started in 2017, but it's going to start again.
I have friends who are, and I think this just kind of typifies the disconnect and the divide. And to me, the most heartening thing about the election result is not necessarily a specific policy, although I think that there are policies to be enthusiastic about. But to me, it's more just a realistic assessment of where we are as a society. Those quotes, typify, unfortunately, people who are politically liberal because they legitimately believe that their existence is now imperiled and threatened by.
But do they?
Well, I'm telling you, I have friends who very much are that way.
But it's delusional. It's based on a fantasy, right?
Well, I don't think it's real, but I think what I'm saying is that I like that most Americans get that that's not real.
Right.
They get that Donald Trump isn't actually Hitler.
Right.
You know, I mean, I kind of want to joke and send my friends like a text message, be like, guys, you know, I'm kind of connected now, so I get 12 names that I keep out of the camps. If you promise to behave, I'll get you in. You know, but those that would just like trigger them more because they legitimately are afraid for these
but
things.
It's mass delusion, and that's the thing that concerns me and bothers me. That a lot of these people, and we all know them. These are not people that are, let's say, homeless and on pharmaceuticals. These are people that have responsible, steady jobs.
But also maybe on pharmaceuticals.
Right. But I mean, my point is, these are people that have some level of normalcy in their life, and it's so detached from reality. I think every week we need to remind the people that made these ridiculous statements, the Joe Scarboroughs of the world, that made these ridiculous statements. Disagree with Donald Trump.
Sure.
Say you don't like him. That's great. But these people who said that they are going to use the military, they're going to gun down people in the streets, every week they need to be reminded and mocked. We can't just let this slide as, oh, well, it was just overheated rhetoric. It's not. It has consequences of it. They ought to be embarrassed and they ought to be held in account for it.
They do, but you have to remember, like, this entire world exists on this drugged up fantasy. I mean, I watched Andrea Mitchell this morning. I could smell the ketamine through the TV, okay? Like
Andrea Mitchell drugged up? I never thought I would hear those words.
But I'm saying, like, why did they put Kamala Harris as the candidate in the first place? By the way, you have to include making the most powerful person in the country stop running to be that person against their will and replace them with somebody they thought would be better, among the things that these people did to try to keep Donald Trump from being president again. But remember, she was the nominee because of this belief, the fantastical belief that, like, you can't overlook an African-American female. We abide by the identity politics that we have to put her in place because we can't let somebody not vote for, you know what I mean?
I think that's why. I do also think, look, she was vice president, right? She was the number 2 position. I agree with you. They should have had a process. And you're right. The lie began with Joe Biden is fine. He's healthy. He's coherent. He's great. He's so, yeah, there's plenty of lies here. But I guess my point is, we need to hold into account these powerful institutions that we used to be able to trust, like mainstream media. Look, they were liberal. We all knew that. The New York Times in the 1980s, they were liberal. But this is unhinged insanity. And for them to be writing, as we talked about at the beginning, this essay, it was, by the way, a media analysis. This was not an op-ed. This is on the news page.
This is the news coverage of the election is,
here's Hitler.
We are now on the precipice of this, the most imperiled time in our country's history.
Yeah, so we need to relentlessly mock and scorn these people.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, I don't feel a dictatorship coming around. That is not what Trump is about. That's not what his movement is about. And they need to be scorned for this and held into account, or they'll keep doing it.
You almost sound like Donald Trump, like you are the revenge with your mockery and scorning, Peter Schweizer. I'm going to get you a Care Bear sweatshirt and try to dial you back a little bit. But I do think, to your point, that it's only going to get worse. And you and I were talking about it, and even today, if you watch the coverage, as the media and the coverage wrestles with the reality of what the next 4 years will look like, they're seizing upon, if Trump's Hitler, to your point, they're committed to that.
Yeah.
Trump has to be Hitler. So what will it look like for Trump to be Hitler? It will look like, oh, he's gathering up brown people, aka illegal immigrants, and he's deporting them, or he's shipping them off, not unlike the Nazis did. And that's going to be, so it's not just going to be, no, he's enacting the immigration reform he campaigned on. It's going to be, oh, he's going after non-whites, and therefore, like, that is like the white racist stuff. So that will be among the things that I think you have to be vigilant and covering, because as we're aware, immigration is a complex issue. It's plagued administrations, every administration this century. Enacting deportation or getting some of the people who are here illegally, the tens of millions of people here illegally, doesn't make you a Nazi. It makes you an America First candidate, which is exactly what he said he would be.
Yeah, and you're enforcing the laws. But to your point, yeah, that's going to be one of the things that people have to brace themselves for. The media is going to become more unhinged. They're going to inaccurately report things. Look, report. If you have a disagreement on immigration, report it. But don't try to mischaracterize it. You remember the story about the Border Patrol agents that were whipping the Haitians, which ended up being totally fake news. They never really apologized for that. They never really said, oh, we made a mistake and corrected the record. They just moved on to the next one because it serves the broader narrative. So we can expect more ramped up media coverage that's hyperbolic. But the good news is it didn't work during the campaign. And I think that they have really demonstrated their impotence. So there's going to be more of that turmoil, but it's going to have less effect. That's one function of it. The second function of it, though, on that issue is you're going to get a lot of people deep in the federal bureaucracy that are part of the deep state who are going to be leaking like crazy to try to undermine and create greater chaos. And it's going to be incumbent upon the administration not to get distracted. They kind of did that last time. And for voters and the American people to take with a grain of salt what they're actually being told is happening based on these so-called leaks.
Yeah, the one line in Lisa Lair's New York Times News analysis that you previously touched on, but it's worth underlining, is he would fire thousands of career public servants.
Oh, no.
One person's career public servant is another person's deep state operative who works to resist. And I think, as you've said, maybe they didn't do a great job of kind of weeding those people out in the first Trump administration, and we expect that to change. You and I have previously discussed the idea of maybe somebody like Ron DeSantis, who becomes Attorney General, who has said, listen, you've got to get these people out of there, because Trump has beaten not just Kamala Harris, but the Biden Department of Justice, who has thrown every trick in the book, lawfare and otherwise, at him, and he has won. And so you have to think going after that's going to be one of, like, you go after legal
100%.
immigrants and you go after the legal attack dogs in DOJ.
Yeah, at DOJ and in the bureaucracy in general. I mean, here's the thing. And there's been a lot of academic studies. This is not just like crazy right-wingers ranting. There's a lot of academic evidence. Johns Hopkins University had a study by two scholars where they interviewed senior officials in the senior executive service in our federal government. And they asked them questions like, if a president passed a law supported by the American people that was constitutional that you did not agree with, would you do things to undermine it? And more than 50% of these senior executive service employees said yes, they would. That's not their job.
Right.
That's not their job. They're not elected by anybody. They're bureaucrats. So it's that kind of mindset that Trump is trying to deal with. And so you've got the mainstream media, you've got deep state. I think those are important elements of the kind of resistance. And then the shenanigans that we can expect in the House, but particularly the Senate, because the Senate has a lot more latitude. They're going to do everything they can to bottle up legislation to stop the reforms that Trump is pushing from getting through. And look, his supporters are craving and desiring real reform and change. And so that's going to be where they can have a lot of effect. But hopefully the Republicans on Capitol Hill will keep it together.
One other thing I think you can expect to see some movement on, I think that the immigration thing is a big one. I think the economy is a big one. And I also think, look, to the extent that Donald Trump won and you have 15 million fewer votes that happened 4 years ago, you could offer up a lot of different explanations, but they have a lot of common sense, in my opinion, election integrity efforts that were in place this time that weren't in place last time. The state of Georgia passed an election reform bill. They paid the political and cultural penalty. They were called racist. They lost the Major League Baseball All-Star game, but they still did it. And they can point to statistics and say, look, there was no allegations of voter suppression. There's no racism. So people now know what it looks like to call it out for the lie that it is, and you see the result, which is just a fair election.
Right.
I expect you see Donald Trump will push that and he said he would, at the federal level, whether that's something that kind of like offers more verification to keep voter rolls accurate, more coordination with the states. I think you'll see them do that. And I do think that will be another thing where they get called out as, oh, you're trying to keep black and brown people from voting. Is like, no, I'm trying to keep dead people from voting. So
yeah. But I mean, I don't know if Georgia was fair. Have you asked Stacey Abrams? I mean, is she?
Fun fact, still waiting on her to concede from the governor's race. So here's my question. By the way, just to wrap up, Donald Trump now has this really bizarre. I mean, he's only the second person ever to win the presidency in non-consecutive terms.
Yeah,
that's happened once before with Grover Cleveland, presidential scholar. Do you know who the person in between Grover Cleveland was? I know I didn't prep you for this, but I wanted to see. It's Benjamin Harrison,
who's
kind of only famous for being the grandson of William Henry Harrison.
Yep.
So Grover Cleveland, it's interesting parallels. You read about Grover Cleveland, was a New Yorker. So the person who was previously a president, then not the president, then president, the only other person besides Trump to do this, was a New Yorker, was actually accused of raping a woman he dated, and even though he said it was consensual, as president, used his appointment powers to reduce the number of federal employees. Economic policy included a lot of discussion over tariffs, and lost his first re-election bid because of allegations over voter fraud in Indiana.
Interesting. So we've kind of sort of maybe been here before.
We have.
Although we didn't have the crazy media. We didn't have Hollywood.
Back then they had really spicy political cartoons. Those were like the OG memes.
Right. And they had vaudeville, right? They had the vaudeville. Instead of bringing in J-Lo and all the others, they brought in the vaudeville guys.
The guy with the long nails. He's pro Harrison. What do you want?
Exactly. Well, that does give you hope. And I do think we always have to remind ourselves that there's been a lot of tumult in American history, but we always find a way through. And I came away from election night very, very encouraged, not just because the reformers, the people that really want to fix the problems in this country won, which is a good thing, but also I was surprised, honestly, by the size of the victory, that he won the popular vote, and the fact that it wasn't like extreme demographic breaks, right?
Yeah.
It was like 95% of one ethnic group, 95% of the other. He really did put together a multi-ethnic coalition and also a multi-economic coalition, right? You had billionaires that supported him. You had a lot of hard hat guys that did as well. That is, I think, a healthy sign for where we're going.
Yeah, and actually, Marco Rubio said this better than anybody else in his post-election breakdown, because the left has tried to break people into, you got uneducated women did this and Hispanic men did this. But listen to what Marco Rubio said just about the appeal of Donald Trump, and maybe if there's one thing to be really hopeful for, that we start thinking of ourselves more as just Americans. Listen to Rubio.
And Donald Trump appealed to Americans as Americans, irrespective of your background or your customs or what music you listen to or how your last name is pronounced. This is more than just a realignment. I hope it's a realization that when you come to this country and you put your roots down here and you raise your children here, you become an American. And everything from our economy to our safety to our national security matter as much to you as they do to anybody else in this country.
Yeah, I think that was well said. And look, the identity politics that Barack Obama excelled at, which he tried to reignite in this election and failed by basically shaming black men, how could you possibly vote for Trump, has failed. She actually got fewer black votes than Joe Biden did.
Yeah.
And that to me is a sign not only of the appeal of Donald Trump, but also that people are starting to say, hey, like, just because you run an Irish guy and I'm Irish doesn't mean I'm going to vote for him.
So not only did she not know about black jobs, she didn't know about black votes either. Is that what you're trying to say? So to wrap up, Peter Schweizer, and this is just pure question, but look, you're a successful author. Your book, Clinton Cash, was read on the campaign stage before for Donald Trump. You've got, I think it's fair to say, Donald Trump's a fan of yours. So, if you were going to be like an ambassador, like to Sweden, Switzerland, is there anything you're interested in at all?
I'm not interested, but of course my father was Swiss, so if I had to pick a country, Switzerland would be a great place to be the ambassador to. But no, I love where
So you're
I'm
not
doing.
Available to be the Swiss ambassador. I'm only asking because you have this awesome office. It would, it's right next to mine. I could easily
You
slide
just
in there.
take it, right. So I moved to Switzerland and you move into my office, right? Well, we appreciate it always as listening. We had a great time at the party last night. Eric was feeding me data. It was a very, very jovial mood. We hope it was the same for you, and we hope that you are optimistic about the future of the country and where it's headed, contrary to what the New York Times is telling you. You can find out more about our research at thedrilldown.com, and certainly you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you can subscribe to find podcasts. So thank you very much for listening. We appreciate your time. Until the next time, God bless.